The glass tower restaurant shimmered under the noon sun, a place where silence was expensive and smiles were rehearsed. Forks clinked softly, waiters moved like shadows, and the city of Tokyo stretched beneath the panoramic windows. At table 7 sat 4 men in black suits, their tattoos barely hidden beneath white collars. Between them was Aiko Tanaka, the Japanese billionaire chief executive officer of Tanaka Robotics. Her face was calm, polite, unreadable, but her hand trembled slightly as it reached for a napkin. Naomi Brooks, the waitress on duty, noticed the small movement while setting down a glass of cranberry juice. The air in the room felt colder than it should have been. Naomi had worked in luxury dining long enough to sense danger without seeing it. When Aiko's hand returned to the table, Naomi saw it. One word written in pen on the corner of the napkin. The letters were small, but desperate. It said help. For a heartbeat, Naomi froze. The 4 men around the table kept talking in low Japanese, their smiles too stiff, their eyes too watchful. Naomi's chest tightened as Aiko looked up at her. Their eyes met for only 1 second, but the message was clear. Stay, or she was dead. Naomi felt the pulse in her neck quicken. She had been a nurse once, trained to see the signs of silent panic. The shallow breath, the trembling lip held still by pride. That same look had once crossed the face of a refugee she saved years ago, back when courage still cost her a career. Now, it was staring at her from across a linen table. Aiko Tanaka's beauty was porcelain, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had not slept in days. The men beside her were pretending to be clients, but the body language betrayed them. Their posture was military, their watches identical, their attention fixed on her every move. Naomi steadied her tray and spoke softly. Excuse me, ma'am, would you like ice in your drink? It was a code she had used once before, a test to see if the person in trouble could answer safely. Aiko nodded too quickly. No ice, she said, her voice small but deliberate. Her hands rested perfectly still, except for the smallest tap of her index finger on the table. Tap, pause, tap tap. It was Morse code. Naomi remembered it from her nursing days. With the humanitarian corps. The pattern meant danger now. The room blurred for a moment, as if the world had narrowed down to one napkin and one choice. Walk away and pretend she saw nothing, or stay and risk everything again. Outside, a helicopter drifted past the skyline, its reflection flashing across the glass wall like a warning. Naomi inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the rhythm of her breath. The 4 men laughed at something in Japanese, but their eyes never left Aiko. Naomi turned, pretending to adjust her tray, but her mind was already moving faster than her body. Every instinct screamed that this was not just business. It was a hostage table dressed as a lunch meeting. And in that room of quiet wealth and polished cruelty, a single napkin had just spoken louder than money ever could. Naomi's mind raced, but her body remained composed. The napkin lay near the edge of the table, a silent cry for help hidden in plain sight. Every instinct told her something was deeply wrong. She forced herself to move naturally, collecting empty glasses from nearby tables to disguise her presence. She listened carefully. The men spoke softly in Japanese, their tone polite but edged with control. Naomi could not understand every word, but the rhythm of dominance was universal. One man called Aiko Tanaka-san, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Another leaned closer, tapping his pen against a stack of documents. Sign it, he said in English. His accent was thick, but his meaning was crystal clear. Aiko nodded faintly, but made no move toward the paper. Naomi stepped closer under the pretense of clearing plates. Her eyes darted to the paper. It bore the Tanaka Robotics seal and a corporate letterhead. It looked like a transfer of ownership document, dense with legal language. Aiko's company was worth billions of dollars, but her hand hovered over the pen as if it weighed 100 pounds. Naomi could see the faint bruises on Aiko's wrist where a watch might have been ripped away. She felt her stomach twist. This was not negotiation. This was coercion in daylight. The restaurant's other guests continued eating, blissfully unaware of the quiet war taking place 2 tables away. The men controlled the space with calculated calm. One of them reached for his glass of whiskey, took a slow sip, and glanced toward Naomi. She froze, pretending to adjust the position of a salt shaker. His gaze lingered long enough to remind her that she was seen, evaluated, and dismissed as unimportant. That was exactly what she needed him to believe. Aiko's eyes flicked to the window. Outside, the street shimmered in the summer heat, taxis inching through traffic below. Her lips moved soundlessly. Naomi tried to read them. One word repeated twice. Poison. Naomi's heart skipped. She looked down at the table again. The untouched cranberry juice glowed bright red under the sunlight, beautiful and deadly. Without thinking, she reached for it. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I will bring you a fresh drink. The ice is melting." Her voice was steady, but her pulse roared in her ears. One of the men raised an eyebrow. "It is fine," he said flatly. His English was clipped, precise. Naomi smiled politely. "Our manager insists. Fresh service every 20 minutes. The man gave a small nod of irritation, turning back to his companions. Naomi's hand closed around the glass. It was cold, heavy, trembling slightly in her grasp. She carried it away from the table and disappeared into the service hallway. The moment she was out of sight, she dumped the liquid into the sink. The air filled with the faint, metallic scent of chemicals. It was not cranberry. She washed the glass twice, her breath quick and shallow. She had confirmed the truth. Someone wanted Aiko silenced. Naomi gripped the counter, thinking, calling the police could make it worse. If these men were connected, they would vanish before authorities arrived. She needed proof and time. She needed to keep Aiko alive long enough for someone to believe her. She glanced at the kitchen clock. It was 1:32 in the afternoon. The lunch rush was thinning. That meant fewer witnesses, fewer chances to hide in plain sight. Naomi took a slow breath and stepped back into the dining area. The men were laughing now, but Aiko was not. Her hand rested near the edge of the table where the napkin had been. It was gone. Naomi's chest tightened. One of the men held it loosely in his hand, folded twice, unreadable from her distance. His lips curved into a smile as he lit a cigarette and used the napkin to block the ash from falling. He had seen it. He knew. Naomi forced her feet to keep moving. She cleared plates, refilled glasses, smiled at other guests. Every motion was precise, mechanical, designed to look ordinary. But inside, her thoughts were spiraling. Aiko's eyes met hers again, pleading but restrained. In that glance, Naomi saw both gratitude and terror. She wanted to tell her she understood. She wanted to promise help was coming. But she could not speak. In a room ruled by money and fear, words were weapons that could kill faster than poison. Naomi adjusted her apron, her heart steadying into resolve. She had chosen once before to look away and live with the guilt. She would not make that mistake again. Whatever game these men were playing, they had just underestimated the wrong waitress. Naomi's body moved through the restaurant with mechanical grace, but her mind was a storm. The napkin had been taken, the message discovered, and yet Aiko still sat there, trapped inside her own silence. Naomi kept her smile steady as she passed other guests, though her pulse hammered behind her ribs like a drum. She could not show fear. Not here. Not when every wrong glance might draw suspicion. At the bar counter, she paused to refill a carafe, using the reflection of the glass shelves to watch the men at table 7. Their conversation had shifted, more intense now. One leaned close to Aiko, whispering something in her ear that made her flinch almost imperceptibly. Another man placed a small black case beside her plate. Naomi could not see what was inside, but she saw the way Aiko's eyes dimmed when she looked at it. There was power in that case. Something signed, something stolen, something that should never leave her hands. Naomi forced herself to turn away. She steadied her hands and poured water until the carafe overflowed. Her reflection looked back at her, wide-eyed and uncertain. In that moment, memories she had buried long ago pushed through the fog of fear. Years before, she had worked in a field hospital overseas. She remembered the boy she could not save, the one who died because she hesitated to defy an order. She had promised herself she would never freeze again, never let silence cost another life. Now she was standing in a restaurant in Tokyo, dressed in a borrowed uniform, faced with the same moral line. Walk away or stand up. Survive or do what is right. Naomi's breath trembled, but her voice did not when she spoke to the bartender. "Can you ask the manager to come to the front?" she said softly. Table 7 might need assistance. It was a calculated risk, a signal disguised as professionalism. The bartender nodded, unaware of the code behind her words. She walked back toward the dining area, each step deliberate, each movement rehearsed. As she passed by table 6, she caught a reflection in the window. One of the men from table 7 had risen. He was watching her now. His expression was polite, but his eyes held the sharpness of a blade. Naomi pretended not to notice. She stopped at a nearby table, smiled at an elderly couple, and adjusted their napkins as if her entire world were normal. But her heart was counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Behind her, the man's footsteps began to move. She could hear them, measured and unhurried. When she turned, he was there, only a few feet away. "Miss," he said in perfect English. "The service is excellent today." Naomi forced a smile. "Thank you, sir. We appreciate your visit." The man's eyes flicked toward the hallway leading to the kitchen. "I noticed you replaced our drink earlier." "How thoughtful." His voice was smooth, too smooth. Naomi held his gaze. "We take pride in attention to detail," she replied evenly. The man nodded slowly. "Good. Attention to detail keeps people alive." He smiled then, but it was not the kind that reached the eyes. He returned to his seat, leaving a chill in his wake. Naomi exhaled quietly, realizing how close she was to being caught. Across the room, Aiko had not moved. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. The tension between them stretched invisible but unbreakable, a thread of silent understanding. Naomi glanced toward the entrance where the manager had just appeared. He was tall, kind, and completely unaware of the danger. She had worked with him for 6 months. He trusted her. That was the only advantage she had. She met his eyes and shook her head slightly. It was a signal to stay back, but he misunderstood and approached the table with a polite smile. Naomi's stomach dropped. The man who had followed her rose again, intercepting him halfway. Their voices were quiet, too quiet. Within seconds, the manager nodded and retreated, confusion clouding his face. Naomi watched helplessly as the trap tightened again. Aiko was alone once more, the men's laughter returning like knives wrapped in silk. Naomi felt something shift inside her then, a quiet rage that steadied her hands instead of shaking them. If the world had decided she was invisible, then invisibility would become her weapon. Whatever it took, she would find a way to break that table of power before it swallowed another human being whole. The luxury dining room felt like a stage, every sound rehearsed, every gesture measured, every secret sealed beneath a polished smile. Naomi's eyes tracked every movement at table 7, but she never stopped serving. Her hands moved like clockwork, balancing trays, pouring water, folding napkins, while her mind drew a map of danger. She counted 4 men, 1 billionaire, 1 exit, and 100 ways this could go wrong. Yet in that ocean of power and fear, she found a strange calm. For the first time, she could see them clearly. These were not shadows in suits. They were wolves in daylight, men who used manners as weapons and contracts as chains. And at the center of their control sat Aiko Tanaka, a woman who had once ruled rooms like this, now trapped by the very wealth she had built. Naomi had read about her before. The daughter of a robotics engineer and a calligraphy artist, Aiko had turned a small Tokyo startup into one of Asia's largest technology empires. Her inventions were meant to heal, not to harm. But the more successful she became, the more enemies her light attracted. The company's latest project, a neural microchip for medical implants, had drawn attention from investors who did not care about healing. They cared about power. And now they wanted that technology, signed away in ink, no matter what it cost her. Naomi understood that kind of betrayal. Once, she had worked in a research hospital that sold patient data to pharmaceutical companies. When she tried to expose it, she was labeled disloyal, forced out quietly. Since then, she had learned to survive by blending in, by becoming the kind of woman no one remembered. But invisibility had its advantages. People did not see you coming. Across the room, Aiko's hand twitched toward her bag. Naomi saw the faint movement and followed it with her eyes. Tucked between the napkins on the chair beside Aiko was a small leather folder. Its edge was frayed, the kind used to hold passports and travel documents. If she could get that folder, maybe she could find proof, a name, something that could buy them both time. Naomi needed a distraction. She glanced at the dessert cart being rolled out by another server and nodded subtly. The server smiled, oblivious, and wheeled it closer. Naomi took the cue and approached table 7 again. "Would you care for dessert?" she asked politely, her tone perfectly rehearsed. One of the men waved her off without looking up. Another said something sharp in Japanese that made Aiko flinch. The leader, the one in the gray suit, smirked. "Maybe later," he said in English, his voice dripping with condescension. Naomi bowed slightly, then let her tray tilt just enough for a spoon to fall, clattering against the marble floor. The sound cracked the air like a small explosion. Every head turned for a split second, just long enough. Naomi crouched to retrieve the spoon, her hand brushing the side of Aiko's chair. Her fingers found the edge of the leather folder. Aiko's hand moved too, covering Naomi's briefly, pressing it down. In that single touch, they understood each other. Not yet. Naomi rose, holding the spoon like nothing had happened, but the message was clear. Aiko was not just scared, she was planning something, and Naomi was now part of it. The man in gray leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "You seem nervous," he said quietly. Naomi smiled. "Only because I do not want to drop another spoon, sir." His smirk returned, thin and cruel. He looked at her the way people look at paintings they do not intend to buy. She turned away before he could read the defiance in her face. The dessert cart moved on, the brief window of chaos closing behind her. As she stepped back toward the bar, Naomi caught her reflection again. For a moment she saw not a waitress, but a soldier in plain clothes, a woman armed with nothing but courage and timing. The storm outside had started to roll in, lightning flashing faintly beyond the glass. In its reflection, she saw Aiko's profile, still, regal, waiting. Two women on opposite sides of power, bound now by a silent agreement. Whatever happened next, Naomi knew one thing for certain. She was done being invisible. The air in the dining room grew heavier with every passing minute, the kind of tension that crawled beneath the skin and made every sound feel louder. Naomi stood near the bar, pretending to polish glasses while her mind searched for a plan. She knew she was running out of time. The men at table 7 had shifted positions, closing in around Aiko like wolves tightening their circle. The leader in the gray suit placed a pen on the contract and leaned closer to her, whispering something that made the color drain from her face. Aiko hesitated, then reached for the pen with a trembling hand. That was when Naomi saw it. A faint mark on the rim of Aiko's new drink, a strange shimmer like oil on water. Her instincts screamed danger. She could not think, she could only act. She grabbed a fresh tray from the counter and walked back toward the table, her footsteps steady, her voice calm. "Pardon me, sir," she said softly to the man in the gray suit. "We have received a request from the kitchen to confirm your wine selection. There has been a change in inventory." The man glanced at her, irritated. "Now is not the time," he said, waving her off. Naomi smiled politely, keeping her hand near Aiko's glass. "I understand, but it will only take a moment." The man sighed and leaned back, gesturing for her to hurry. That was all the window she needed. Naomi reached for Aiko's glass, her fingers closing around it just as Aiko's hand twitched toward the same spot. For an instant their eyes met again. Naomi mouthed one word. "Poison." Aiko froze, her breath catching, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Naomi lifted the glass and held it to the light, as if inspecting the clarity. The faint chemical sheen glimmered once more before she set the glass aside. "I will bring a replacement," she said softly. The man in gray narrowed his eyes, suspicion flickering behind his calm exterior. "Make it quick," he said. Naomi turned and began walking toward the kitchen, but her heart was pounding like thunder. She reached the hallway and quickened her pace, gripping the glass tighter. She needed proof, something undeniable. She stepped into the service area and found the head chef plating desserts. "Chef," she whispered urgently, "I need you to smell this." He frowned but obeyed. The moment he lifted the glass to his nose, his eyes widened. "This is not alcohol," he muttered. "This smells like chloroform mixed with ethanol." Naomi's blood ran cold. If she had drunk that, her voice faded. The chef's expression hardened. "You should call security," he said. "No," Naomi replied quickly. "Not yet. We cannot risk warning them. Just stall any new orders for that table. Please." The chef nodded reluctantly. Naomi poured the liquid down the sink and rinsed the glass, but her hands trembled. She wiped them dry, forcing her breath to steady. She had proof now, but it would mean nothing if Aiko did not survive long enough for anyone to see it. She returned to the dining room. Aiko was still seated, pen in hand, but the document remained unsigned. The men's laughter was thinner now, more brittle, as if patience was running out. Naomi's pulse echoed in her ears. She walked to another table nearby, pretending to refill water, her eyes never leaving Aiko. Suddenly, Aiko's pen slipped from her fingers, rolling to the floor near Naomi's feet. Naomi knelt to pick it up. As she rose, she whispered just loud enough for Aiko to hear. "When I drop the tray, stand up." Aiko's gaze flickered with understanding. Naomi turned, balancing a tray of empty glasses. She took one deep breath and let it fall. The crash shattered the silence. Water splashed across the marble, silverware clattered, and startled guests gasped. Naomi's voice cut through the noise. "Ma'am, please come with me. There is an issue in the kitchen that requires your attention." Every head turned. The men at table 7 froze, unsure how to react under so many watching eyes. Aiko stood, her composure perfect, and nodded once. "Of course," she said, her voice calm but firm. Naomi gestured toward the hallway, guiding her quickly away. The world slowed for a heartbeat as they crossed the dining room floor, 2 women walking through danger disguised as elegance. Behind them, the men whispered rapidly, rising from their chairs. But Naomi did not look back. Her only thought was clear and sharp as glass. They had one chance to get out alive. The moment the tray hit the floor, Naomi's world turned into motion. Glass shattered across the marble tiles like the sound of breaking chains. The sudden noise drew every pair of eyes in the restaurant, buying her a handful of seconds. That meant survival. She reached for Aiko's arm and guided her swiftly through the nearest hallway that led toward the kitchen. "Keep walking," she whispered, her voice low but steady. "Do not stop for anyone." Behind them, the men were rising, confusion spreading like wildfire. One of them called out Aiko's name sharply, but the crowded room muffled his voice. The manager stepped forward, startled by the chaos, but Naomi waved him off. "Emergency in the back," she said quickly. He hesitated, unsure, then nodded. That hesitation gave her the space she needed. They entered the service corridor, a narrow hallway lined with steel shelves and the faint hum of freezers. The sharp scent of lemon cleaner filled the air. Naomi's shoes slipped slightly on the tile as she moved, adrenaline pushing her faster. "This way," she said, guiding Aiko toward the storage room near the back exit. Once inside, she closed the door quietly and locked it. Aiko leaned against the wall, breath shallow, face pale under the fluorescent light. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Only the hum of the freezer filled the silence. Then Aiko whispered, "You should not have done that. They will come after you." Naomi's reply came without hesitation. "They were already coming after you. I just changed the direction." Aiko looked at her for a long moment, eyes shining with a mix of fear and disbelief. "Do you know who they are?" Naomi nodded slowly. "Corporate muscle. The kind that cleans up messes by creating new ones." She moved to the counter and picked up her phone, dialing quickly. The number was one she had memorized years ago. A friend who worked in emergency services, someone she trusted with her life. When the call connected, Naomi spoke in code. "We have a health emergency at Tokyo Tower Hotel, service level 3. Possible contamination. Immediate response required." The voice on the other end understood. "On the way," the dispatcher said before hanging up. Aiko watched her, stunned. "You have done this before," she said quietly. Naomi shook her head. "Not like this. But I have seen enough to know how these stories end when no one acts." A loud knock echoed from the hallway, followed by a man's voice. "Miss Brooks, open the door. We need to speak with the guest." Naomi froze, her heart thundering. The men had found them faster than she hoped. She looked around the room, scanning for exits. There was one, the emergency stairwell through the freezer storage. "Follow me," she whispered. They slipped through the narrow passage, pushing open the heavy metal door. Cold air rushed over them, and the echo of footsteps grew closer behind. Naomi took Aiko's hand and pulled her down the stairwell, their steps echoing in rhythm. "How did you know?" Aiko asked breathlessly. Naomi's answer came between gasps. "Because I have seen what power does when no one stops it." They reached the bottom of the stairs, emerging into a small loading dock that smelled of rain and gasoline. A delivery truck idled nearby, the driver smoking a cigarette and checking his watch. Naomi approached him quickly. "We need to borrow your truck," she said firmly. The man blinked in confusion, but before he could refuse, Aiko stepped forward, pulling a sleek black card from her pocket. "I will pay for your time," she said. The driver hesitated, then nodded, tossing her the keys. Naomi helped Aiko into the back of the truck, pulling the door shut just as voices echoed down the stairwell above. The truck engine roared to life. As they pulled away from the hotel, Naomi looked through the rearview mirror. Two of the men had reached the loading dock, staring after them as the rain began to fall harder. She exhaled, her pulse still racing. Beside her, Aiko sat in silence, eyes fixed on the storm ahead. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe. The city lights blurred through the raindrops, and Naomi realized the truth. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But in a world built on silence, someone had to make the first sound. The rain turned Tokyo's streets into mirrors of light, every reflection trembling like a heartbeat. The delivery truck sped through the downpour, wipers slicing back and forth in frantic rhythm. Inside, Naomi gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale against the dark leather. Aiko sat beside her, silent, drenched in fear and exhaustion. Her designer suit was torn at the sleeve, her once flawless hair clinging to her face. For the first time, Naomi saw not a billionaire but a woman stripped of armor, fragile, yet still fighting to stay composed. "We are not safe yet," Naomi said softly, glancing in the mirror. Headlights appeared behind them, too steady to be random traffic. The men were following. Aiko's breath hitched. "They will not stop," she whispered. "If they get that contract, my company is gone. Thousands of jobs, years of research, all destroyed." Naomi turned sharply onto a side street, tires splashing through puddles. "Then we make sure they never get it," she said. "Do you still have the folder?" Aiko nodded weakly, pulling the leather case from her jacket. Naomi exhaled in relief. "Good. That is what they want. It is our leverage." The truck rattled as it crossed an old bridge, the neon lights fading behind them. They entered an industrial district where the streets narrowed and the air smelled of iron and rain. Naomi parked beneath the overhang of an abandoned factory, killed the engine, and listened. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the steady rhythm of the rain. "We can rest for a moment," she said. Aiko shook her head. "No, they are tracking my phone." Without hesitation, Naomi took it from her hand and tossed it into a nearby puddle. The screen cracked and flickered out. "Not anymore," Naomi said. Aiko gave her a look halfway between gratitude and disbelief. "You saved me without knowing who I am." Naomi's reply was quiet but fierce. "I did not need to know. You asked for help." For a moment, they just sat there, the silence heavy but alive. Then a faint noise broke through, a car door slamming in the distance. Naomi's muscles tensed. "They found us," she said. She reached for a metal pipe lying near the truck bed, her grip steady. "Stay behind me." Aiko tried to protest, but Naomi's expression stopped her. The footsteps grew louder, echoing off the wet pavement. A shadow moved through the fog, then another. Naomi's heart pounded, but she kept her stance firm. Before the men could reach the truck, a flash of blue lights cut through the darkness. Sirens blared. Police vehicles skidded to a halt, surrounding the area. The men froze, caught between flight and surrender. Naomi's call had worked. The emergency code had brought them straight to this location. Officers rushed in, shouting commands in Japanese. Within seconds, the men were restrained, their weapons confiscated. Naomi lowered the pipe, her arms trembling with relief. Aiko turned to her, eyes wide with tears. "How did you know they would come?" she asked. Naomi managed a small, tired smile. "Because sometimes, faith travels faster than fear." The rain softened into a drizzle as the officers led the men away. For the first time that night, Aiko Tanaka stood upright without shaking. The weight of her power no longer came from money or status. It came from surviving. Naomi looked up at the gray morning sky, her reflection shimmering in the puddle below. The city was still, as if holding its breath. For the first time in years, she felt something she had forgotten existed: peace. By morning, the storm had lifted, leaving Tokyo washed clean under a pale silver sky. The city moved on as if nothing had happened, unaware that the balance of power had quietly shifted overnight. In the back of an ambulance parked outside the hotel, Aiko Tanaka sat wrapped in a gray blanket, her hands still trembling, but her eyes steady again. Cameras flashed at a distance, reporters already swarming for answers. The story was spreading fast. Billionaire chief executive officer rescued from corporate abduction at luxury restaurant. Social media had exploded with clips from guests who recorded the chaos. The footage showed Naomi leading Aiko through the dining room, her body shielding her like a wall of calm courage. People online called her the waitress who saw the truth. Aiko glanced toward the police barricade, where Naomi stood giving her statement to investigators. Her uniform was damp and wrinkled, her hair plastered to her forehead, yet she spoke with quiet conviction. When she finished, she turned and caught Aiko's gaze. The two women exchanged a look that said more than words ever could. Later that afternoon, Aiko requested to meet her privately. Inside a quiet hospital room, she placed the recovered leather folder on the table. "You saved more than my life," she said softly. "You saved what my company stands for." Naomi shook her head. "I just did what anyone should do." Aiko smiled faintly. "You are wrong. People see danger every day and walk away. You stayed." She reached into her bag and handed Naomi a simple white envelope. Inside was a letter of employment with Tanaka Robotics, written in English and sealed with her signature. "You are not meant to disappear behind trays," Aiko said. "You belong where people listen." Naomi hesitated, emotion thick in her throat. "I do not know what to say." "Then just promise me one thing," Aiko replied. "Do not let the world make you small again." Outside, news networks ran the headline, "The napkin that saved a life." The world had seen a billionaire in peril, but more importantly, it had witnessed an ordinary woman act when others froze. As Naomi stepped out of the hospital, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, scattering gold light over the wet pavement. She did not need applause or headlines. The quiet truth was enough. Sometimes, justice does not arrive with sirens. Sometimes, it wears an apron and carries a tray. Weeks later, the restaurant reopened under quiet skies. The marble floors had been polished, the chandeliers gleamed, and the world had already moved on to its next story. But one framed object on the wall stopped every guest who walked through the door. It was a white napkin, its edges smooth flat behind glass, with one single word written in fading ink, "Help." Below it, a brass plaque read, "Silence saves no one." Naomi returned that day not as a waitress, but as a guest. She sat at a corner table, sipping tea while watching the light dance across the city skyline. Across from her, Aiko Tanaka arrived, dressed simply, her presence calm and human now, stripped of all the layers of power that once made her untouchable. They did not need many words. Gratitude lived in the quiet between them. "You could have walked away," Aiko said softly. Naomi smiled. "So could you. But you asked for help, and that was brave." The two women sat in silence, listening to the faint sound of rain against glass. Outside, life went on, but something invisible had shifted. Somewhere in the world, a person would see a cry for help and remember this story. Somewhere, another act of courage was already beginning. As Naomi stood to leave, sunlight broke through the clouds, washing the restaurant in gold. The framed napkin caught the light, glowing like a small beacon of truth. A voice seemed to echo through the air, not loud, but clear. She did not shout. She did not fight. She listened, and that saved a life. Because sometimes, the smallest act of courage rewrites power itself.